Alright, so in this video, we'll be discussing how to write harmony for strings. The string section is one of the most beautiful and instantly recognizable instrument groups in the whole orchestra. They're a standard in most film music and can be used to trigger all kinds of different emotions. That being said, they can be deceptively difficult to get right. I mean, sure, you can just copy and paste your chord progression and have your computer play it, but what comes out won't sound authentic or nearly as impactful as it could. I mean, just listen to the differences between the two examples I have here. The first one is just a simple chord progression. The second one is the same exact chord progression, but written with the strategies I'll be covering in this video. So the first thing you need to know about writing for strings is how many parts you're working with. The typical string section contains 5 parts: the first violin, the second violin, viola, cello, and the double bass. Now typically the first violin is playing the melody, while the other 4 parts provide harmony, and since this video is dedicated to harmony, we'll be sticking with just the second violin, viola, cello, and double bass. So that makes a grand total of 4 parts we need to focus on. As usual, don't worry if you don't have a strong understanding of music theory, since the strategy I'll be sharing with you doesn't require much, if any. It's just one that anyone can use to make any chord progression sound incredible in the strings. So step 1 is to write a chord progression and to copy and paste it. So the chord progression we're working with is going to be a C major, A minor, D minor, and G major that repeats itself for an 8-chord chord progression. Now, I'm just going to copy and paste that so we can have a nice, easy reference to look at as we do all this work. And then we'll move on to step 2, which is to voice lead your chords. Now, if you'd like to learn more about voice leading, I've included a link in the description of this video to another video that goes more in depth. However, since this video is dedicated to harmony, I'm just going to fast forward this part so you don't have to sit through it. There we go. On to step 3, which is to write our bass line. Now, if you have chords in your progression that have 4 notes in them, just pick one of the notes to go in the bass line. If you're like me and have to double some of the notes in your chords to get that 4th note, then you're going to want to follow these guidelines. And that is, the root note is always a safe option. The 5th is a good option, and the 3rd is a risky option. So the root note is the bass note when in the original position. That's always a safe option. The 5th is a good one if you don't want to use the root, and the 3rd, which is the middle one, you want to try and avoid it if you can. You can use it, of course, but it's just a bit risky, because due to some things in harmonic theory that I won't get into detail here, it can start to sound muddy if you've got too many thirds in your chord. But for now, I'm just going to do the root notes to each of my chords. So that's a C, an A D, and a G. C, A. And I don't want to repeat it completely, so let's add a little variety by adding an F here, which again, like I said, is risky, but if you want to, go ahead and do it. And then let's wrap it all up with a D, which is a nice safe option because that's the 5th. Once you're done with your bass line, it's time to move on to step 4, which is to take your chord progression, excluding the bass line, and raise it an octave. Pretty simple. Then you can move on to step 5, which is to take the middle line and drop it an octave. Let's give this a quick listen. That sounds good. And if you really want, you can stop right here. There's no need to go any further. But if you want to go the extra mile, there is one last extra optional step you can take to make this sound even more realistic. And that's to add a bit more movement to each of the lines, because most string players aren't content to just play a long, droning harmony line. But what do I mean by add more movement? Well, real quick, I'm going to soup up the violin line, and then I'll come back and show you what I did and give you the reasonings why. Then we'll go through the bottom 3 lines together. So what did I just do? Well, I shortened this G, this B, and this G, and I threw in a B, an A, and another B. Together with the movement from the other 3 lines, this is going to make it sound so much more realistic. But I didn't just do things randomly. There were 3 guidelines I stuck to when making my decisions on what to move and where. The first one isn't totally applicable to this video, but it's still very important to keep in mind, and that is that your harmony line should only move when the melody line is not. So only move your harmony line like this if the melody line is holding a long note or taking a rest, because you don't want to distract from the melody. The second guideline is to start every chord with the notes it's supposed to start with. So we know that this is supposed to start with a G here, and an A here, and a B here, etc., etc. We don't want to mess with that. So the beginnings of each note should stay where they're supposed to. But the endings are fair game. And the third guideline is to only move one voice at a time. Or I should say only start moving one voice at a time. So we see that this B is moving from the G to the B here. So in all these 3 other voices, in this one beat, this one column, nothing else should be moving. And that's to keep it from sounding too busy and too distracting. But remember, each of these are just guidelines. They're just helpful suggestions. So if you really want to break them, go ahead. Whatever music you write is yours and you can do with it what you'd like. But let's try applying these guidelines to the other 3 lines. So let's get started working on this viola line. Now we don't want to do anything in this first measure because we already see that the violin is moving in this measure. So we're going to leave it how it is. But there's no movement in the second measure. So we can do some movement here in the viola. But we want to make sure it starts with the C, so we're only going to mess with the second half. So let's cut that there. And you know what? We're going to mirror this because mirroring and motifs, which are repeated ideas, are really helpful in music. So in the violin, we went from the G up to the B and then down to the A. So we'll go to C, we'll jump up above the D, which will be to an E, and then down to the D. In the third measure, we see that there's no movement yet, so we can do even more here if we'd like. And I'm going to just switch this D and make it go down to a C, so that we have a nice descending movement here. Next, we're going to leave this D alone. We've moved quite a bit already, and there's movement in the violin, so we're just going to leave it as it is. Next, we're going to go to the C. We're going to leave that as it is too. Just give the viola a little bit of a break. But this last one, there's a little bit of a jump between the B and the D. So let's make that a bit smoother with another descending motion. Because again, we like seeing repeated patterns and motifs. So there we go. We got the viola. On to the cello. There's plenty of movement in the beginning already, so let's leave this long E as it is. The F is probably good too, but by the fourth measure, let's start getting some movement in. Now we see that the violin is already moving in this measure. But because the viola is separating the cello and the violin, because there's another instrument between them, we can be a bit braver with the movement. We just don't want to move at the same exact time. So since the A moves in the last beat, we're going to move this note just a little bit sooner. And let's go to an F. So we have another descending line like we do in the viola section. So G, F, and then that way when the A moves, the cello is already solidly on the F and has stopped moving. Then onto the E. Let's leave the E as it is. Then the F, and because this is moving, you know what? No, let's still add a little bit more movement because the cello hasn't moved that much. Let's take the F, and again, making sure that they're moving at different times, we'll move down to the E for another descending movement, but just after the viola, so they're not moving at the same time. Then finally, we have the double bass. Now, the bass line does not need to move all that much. If there were any line I'd say don't mess with, it'd be the bass line, because the bass is so massive that it actually takes a while for the string to start playing after the player pulls on the bow. But because we want to have a little bit of movement, we're going to add some in here somewhere. Now, there is still no movement in this measure here. And on top of that, this is a pretty big leap between the A and the F. So I'm going to shorten that. And let's just add a quick C in there to bridge that up and have a nice ascending line. And with that, you're done. We've added movement to each of these lines. So let's give it a quick listen. So thanks for watching this video. There are detailed notes on everything we discussed in the description of the video, in case you'd like to copy and paste them for future reference. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. If there's anything else you'd like to see in future videos, just let me know in the comments. But for now, have a great day and keep on writing.